looking forward to your session. Over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. So I have the great pleasure today to have this platform to share thoughts with you about digitalization and finishing technology. And I'm going to be a lot more specific in a moment, but I'm sticking with the title that we used for the promotion as a starting point. And I think that what we should do is give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll dive straight in. So I'm going to cover essentially 4 topics. The first 2 are very brief, and the meat of the presentation in the session is 3 and 4. I'm going to talk about what it means to talk about digital in 2022, because if you'll excuse me for writing off the last 24 days of 2021, my mind is already in 2022. And frankly, for most of you, that's probably true as well. You're just wrapping up this year, but strategically, you're looking ahead. We're going to talk about the goal, and some people may understand what I'm referring to. Others may not, but it'll become clear shortly. Then we'll go on and talk about digital manufacturing of paperboard packaging, because that's what Highcon is involved in, corrugated and folding carton. And then we'll take a case study of digital manufacturing at a company called The Box Maker, a Highcon customer based in the United States, actually a company that's also had a session as part of Futureprint's virtual event in the last month, and then we'll tie it all together in a wrap-up. So one thing that you'll see very clearly is that whilst I will be referring to Highcon, the company that I have the great fortune to be part of, this isn't a Highcon plug. This is actually really a broad-ranging conversation about new ways of working in a changing world. So let's start by talking digital. And here, allow me, please, to give you just a few moments of personal background. I started becoming involved in what you might call the graphic arts industry in February 1994 when I joined Cytex, which was once the pioneer of digital prepress. And I was talking about digital proofing and then computer to plate, which was then highly, highly bleeding edge visionary, and then direct to press. And it was always talking about digital, but we were talking about digital in a narrow sense. Take a digital machine and use it to do something that was typically done non-digitally. And it wasn't talking about an end-to-end process or changing everything. It was very localized. I think when we talk about digital in 2022, there is no longer, and for many years really, there has been no place for talking in limited terms. And to this end, I want to share a couple of thoughts that I picked up from a Harvard Business Review article published about 6 months ago. You see the name, the date, the names of the authors and the date at the bottom of the screen. And they said the question that boards of directors should be asking management teams, and that's a great model to think about what should people be thinking about and doing, is how will digital change the technology model, the operating model, or the business model of the company? And that's the context into which I want to put our conversation. What is the nature of the digital transformation for these industries? How does Highcon fit in as part of it? But it's about the digital transformation. And in this article, they sounded a couple of warning bells that I want to share. One is that too many conversations about digital default to how technology can improve efficiency and cut costs. And don't get me wrong, improving efficiency and cutting costs are worthy goals. But if that is the limit of your vision on digital transformation, it's a blinkered view. It's not looking at the breadth and depth of the potential and the opportunity. And the other warning that they sounded was to beware of what your investment is going to bring. This isn't 1995 or 2000 or 2005. We're in the 2020s. Everybody in most industries, and it's not always true in packaging, but everybody has a digital strategy of some kind already. And therefore, as people make investments and make decisions, they need to ask, am I doing something that's simply playing catch up, what they call table stakes? Or is this something that I can do? Is there something I'm doing here to create a competitive advantage? And my assertion is that the conversation we're about to have about digital manufacturing is an approach to create competitive advantage. Item 2 on the agenda was the goal. And the goal is this book that you can see on the right of the screen, published in 1984 by a guy called Eliyahu Goldratt, actually an Israeli. And it was a pretty revolutionary view on how to drive manufacturing efficiency. He introduced what was called the theory of constraints. And the fascinating thing is, although the book is nearly 40 years old, it hasn't lost its relevance. And I know firms that make it compulsory reading for its management teams on the operations side of the business because the concepts are still valid. And his kind of bottom line is that the goal of a manufacturing operation is to maximize throughput. And throughput is essentially being used as a measurable way of saying shipments to customers, which is a proxy for revenue and for profit, while reducing operational expense and inventory. And the truth is he uses slightly specific definitions of those terms that we don't need to worry about now, but just remember maximizing throughput. And in the book, he has this problem, which is that this company has invested in a robot, because in the mid-80s, robots were all the rage, and this was meant to solve all the problems. And in fact, it didn't solve anything. It created problems because it became a bottleneck. And bottlenecks are the biggest single inhibitor to maximizing throughput. So the whole theory of constraints talks about creating balance. Why does that matter? We'll see in a moment. So if we think about a converter, whether they do cartons or corrugated, what does the generic operation look like? What I'm going to call conventional manufacturing workflow. In the simplest possible terms, somebody orders a package. Whatever this item I got in my hand that the virtual background hides is, it doesn't matter. And the first time it's ordered, some planner somewhere looks at it and says, okay, given the details that I've got, the material they wanted to be printed on, the number of colors, whatever it may be, they lay it out to get as many as they can on the layout. Based on that layout, they send out normally, so it's not normally in-house, to make a die, because they've now done the pre-press and imposition. They then make their plates, and then they get into production, which means printing, die cutting, folding, gluing, and shipping. And what do they then do? They either store or discard plates. If they're lithography plates, they normally discard them. If they're flexo plates, they normally keep them. The die is put away for reuse. And what that means is every time the customer wants more of those boxes, the decisions the planner made first time round drive a remake cycle, which looks from a production perspective exactly the same as the first cycle. Marvelous. Why am I talking about it? I want to explain that it has implications. It's a job-centric view that says, okay, the job is the input, that drives my production. It's not a throughput-centric, goal-centric view of maximizing throughput. Now, the truth is that for classic medium and long-run jobs, that's not a problem. It's simply a statement of fact. That's why it works. That's why people do that. It is optimized for those longer runs. And when you do that, you actually end up with what is critical for an effective manufacturing operation. You have a healthy balance between setup time and production time. And typically, that person doing the layout in step 2 drove the decisions based on the optimizing the efficiency of the printing process, because they typically treated the printing step as the bottleneck, the one that drives the decisions. But having driven the decision there, it affected die cutting forever and so on. Again, that's not a problem statement. This is simply a description. What's happening though? The world is changing. We see that customers are demanding shorter runs, that they want faster delivery, that the ratio between setup and production isn't improving because as jobs change, even though equipment is getting better, there's fighting a losing battle. E-commerce growth is massive, and that also changes demand patterns and order quantities and so on. People want different things from their packaging, so the demands are growing. We're moving from shelf appeal to unboxing experiences, so they start doing different things that can create problems. Easy to open fasteners that once didn't matter. Now nobody wants the film to go onto TikTok or onto Facebook or onto Instagram that shows when I tried to open it, I couldn't, or the thing fell to pieces or whatever it may be. Just-in-time inventory management is also changing patterns. People don't want waste. People don't want to dispose of unused packages because it's expensive and it's not sustainable, it's environmentally unsound. So, I'd ask you rhetorically, ladies and gentlemen out there around the virtual world, are you seeing the same things? And what does it mean for the model we just discussed? And the answer is, as order quantities drop and all those other things happen, three things happen that for the theme of the goal are bad. Throughput goes down because you're spending less time running and more time setting up because the runs get shorter and the setups don't change. The result is you've got more work in process in your plant because things are changing and inventory goes up and operational expenses increase. We don't have to have read the goal to understand that if that's what's happening, Houston, we have a problem. So let's challenge the conventional approach and say, should it be the case that if I have 10 different customer jobs ordered, it means I do 10 print make readies and 10 finishing setups? Should I have, as it were, one standard manufacturing approach for all the jobs that come into my plant, whether somebody's ordered 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, or 1 million? Or maybe we should be thinking about the right tool for the right job. So if you'll go with me, I say, let's think of John Lennon and imagine. It could all look so different. Imagine if you didn't have to worry about the time to make a die or the cost of the die. All of a sudden, minimum order quantities become a different kind of unit. They disappear perhaps, or they massively decrease. Imagine if you could optimize your production around a shift rather than job to job. Imagine if you could reduce the number of setups or make readies while handling more different orders. So in fact, you're not seeing this adverse ratioing worsening between setup and runtime, but in fact, you're maintaining or improving the ratio because you're working differently. And very simply, you don't have to imagine it because that's what I would call a digital manufacturing approach. And the digital manufacturing approach starts with maximizing throughput. And the critical change is in step one. In step one, we said in the conventional approach, your unit is the ordered job. Package X that gets laid out and defines its future forever. In a digital manufacturing approach, what you do is you collect all your jobs for a single shift. You then separate them. The classic jobs go in the classic approach, but those that are shorter run, faster turnaround, one-offs, whatever, you put into the digital pool. You then use, hopefully, much easier than human beings, AI-based software that is going to decide how to best produce those jobs, laying them out, doing production simulations, finding the fastest, shortest way, the best way to get everything with minimal make readies and setups, maximizing runtime and delivering as much throughput as possible. You can do this with digital printing. You can do it with conventional, conventional printing. If you're going to print with analog printing, you need to make plates then. That probably means that's okay for folding carton. It's more of a problem for corrugated because flexo plates take longer and are more expensive. You then do your printing and then you then finish digitally without dies. And we're going to talk about what that means by going through the next two slides as well. Let's understand. Dynamic ganging, that's taking those jobs, putting them through this virtual brain and saying, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And you see the example here, 10 unique jobs, 5 make-readies instead of 10, 5 layouts dies instead of 10. You see here on the right an example of the way that Tilia's Phoenix software actually offers you choices. And it shows you how to lay out the jobs and what the run length is going to be. It'll tell you production time. It'll actually, and I didn't want to make it too complex, it can give you hundreds of options and then recommend the best to maximize throughput. What that means in the most simple terms is instead of making lifetime decisions about an individual package, you're making tactical decisions, because when this job comes in today, it comes in with a bunch of other jobs. When it comes in again, perhaps in 3 months' time, none of the other jobs it came in with first time round are going to be there. And instead of saying, well, I've already made a decision on how I produce this and it ties my hands forever, you're going to be able to actually reproduce it differently because you're doing it digitally as a mindset. You're laying it out in using dynamic ganging, and you're producing it without conventional dies. You're using digital finishing or digital die cutting, where, and here this is my moment when I'm going to say using Highcon, because Highcon's Euclid and Beam families are digital finishing equipment that will use digitally driven mechanical creasing, plus laser cutting, plus digital stripping to actually process the boards. And because you don't have expensive dies with a long lead time, each time that job comes in, it goes on to a new Highcon die, which for laser is no die at all, and for the digitally driven mechanical creasing lines means there's a foil that is a consumable and that you use once and throw away. And what that means is we have a throughput-centric process that is optimized for these shorter run and faster turnaround jobs, and you can do as many as you want. And to just make this really clear, what we're talking about here, and I'm using words that aren't so highfalutin, but actually what we're talking about here is nothing less than a revolution, because all of a sudden, with the software, the AI-based software, and the digital finishing, and potentially the digital printing as well in the mix, you don't just do what you always did in almost the same way. You do everything differently. You open degrees of freedom. You are able to suddenly handle more jobs efficiently. When I was doing other things in previous stages of my career, I used to talk about the glass ceiling. For many companies, adding jobs with shorter runs creates a glass ceiling because they don't have the people, they don't have the capacity, and as there are shorter runs, it doesn't mean they're getting more revenue. It means that they're fighting harder. This is the way to remove the glass ceiling. This is the way to drive throughput. So what we're actually talking about is moving from an approach that says conventional manufacturing is the way I do everything to saying I need the right approach for the right jobs. I'm going to combine 2 different approaches in my operational, conventional manufacturing and digital manufacturing, and the job characteristics are going to determine through which approach I allocate the job. It sounds, I don't know how it sounds to you. To me, I'm convinced. I know that this is the way to do it. But the beauty of what I want to do with you here today, folks, is move from this theoretical conversation that I've led with you to a case study, a real live case study with a real live customer who's doing in real life exactly what you see on the right-hand side of this screen, because their business combines conventional manufacturing approaches with digital manufacturing approaches. And that is how they have been a rapidly growing, highly successful company. And they've been a Highcon customer only in 2021. Their first machine went in the first quarter. The second machine went in the summer, and further growth is expected in the future. So I'm just going to stop for a moment and ask Marcus if there's any questions he'd like to clarify with me before I move on to the case.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. One of the first sort of things that sprung to mind there really was that you mentioned, to start with digital manufacturing and digitalization. What is that? Is that as much about mindset and culture as it is about technology?
So I think the answer is yes. Digital is a technology, or digital equipment is digital. But if you don't say, okay, digital can do different things differently, how do I make it not just a digital box, but a part of a digital opportunity? That's missing out. And to me, that's what digital transformations are. And my belief is that in 2022 or 2021 or 2020 for that matter, digital can no longer just be a box on the floor that does something digitally that previously you did in an analog way, alongside the analog, sometimes going this way, sometimes going that way. You need to take a much broader approach. You need to say, what can digital do for my business? And let's be honest, I've said here that digital manufacturing is for the kinds of jobs that challenge conventional manufacturing. If you're in the fortunate situation, and I wonder if it really is fortunate, and I wonder if it's real or whether somebody is actually, forget what I wonder. If you're in the fortunate situation that all your orders are for 100,000 boxes and above, you never get an order for 500, 1,000, 2,500, 5,000. You never get an order that says, hey, I need this tomorrow. Printed, die cut, folder glued. If you don't have any of those pressures, you can live with your left-hand side because one approach fits all jobs. The question is, where are your customers taking the other jobs? Because almost certainly they have the jobs that are shorter run, faster turnaround. And if they're doing them somewhere else, when is that customer, when is that provider going to take away your bread and butter as well? So I'm assuming that most companies have a mix of jobs. And rather than trying to force everything down the same path, what I'm saying is the meaning of digitalization is actually to say we're opening up alternatives. They're not just the same, doing it analog or digital. There is a digital path. As an operation, we're adopting a digital approach and applying it where it's relevant. Again, don't force everything into the new approach. That's as unwise and unproductive as it is to force everything into the old approach. And that, for me, is what digitalization is. Now, the Harvard Business Review article is talking about much more profound digitalization, digitalizing a whole business, a bank that's gone from old-fashioned banking to online banking, those kinds of things. But that, for me, is what we need to think about. And regrettably, too few players in this industry are thinking broad, and too few vendors are offering a vision that is about more than selling the machines that they sell and connecting the machines that they sell. And what I'm trying to do here is inspire the audience, inspire converters to actually step out of their comfort zone, look critically at their business, and ask not just, can I generate some savings or some efficiencies with a digital piece of equipment, but can I revolutionize the way I work? Because there are new capabilities today that offer me things that were not possible in the past. I'm getting orders that I didn't want in the past. Now I do want them, and I can make them profitable. I can increase my throughput. I can change my business, not by changing everything, but by opening up new possibilities.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of, I hear from the industry and from various, not just in this sector, but generally, that shorter runs is a fact of life.
Yep.
And they're getting shorter. And I hear that some print service providers actually are prepared to lose money rather than not do the jobs, but continue to use analog in spite of the fact that there is a very viable alternative. So it's really about the best of both worlds. Yeah, it's applying logic to the process and trying new things and being open to that. I mean, it's that simple. And I assume you and Highcon as a business are really sort of quite you help your customers through that process. We'll hear a bit about Boxmaker, which would be interesting, but it's not just buy the machine and see you later. It's very much a sort of
absolutely.
Mm.
So let's move on to Boxmaker, Marcus, because I do want to keep an eye on the clock and not try and keep people too long on this call. So here, just to give you the context, folks, a few months ago, I did an interview with Richard Brown, who's the president of the Boxmaker. The Boxmaker, by the way, has an e-commerce operation called Fantastipack. Go look at fantastipack.com because it gives you an idea of what you can really do as a e-commerce packaging operation that says, because we're doing digital manufacturing, we can free all degrees of freedom. You can have any box in any series of dimensions with any of our choice of materials and a different number of printing options. It's pretty impressive. So I interviewed Richard. I'm not going to play the interview for two reasons. Number one, it was too long. Number two, we didn't actually talk about digital manufacturing, but I've pieced it together to support the story because the Boxmaker indeed does digital manufacturing alongside conventional manufacturing. So who are the who is the Boxmaker? They're a 40-year-old company in the Pacific Northwest of the United States that recently acquired a second company. Their biggest piece of the business is corrugated, and they do the things you see here. They're diversified. They were an early adopter of digital printing, and in corrugated, they now have an HPC 500, which is one of those monstrous single-pass corrugated presses, in addition to having a lot of flexo capacity. And they've been in the web-to-print or web-to-pack business for around 5 years. It's 15 to 20% of their business, but 30% if you include the fulfillment they're doing for other vendors. In other words, somebody else out there may be selling this kind of work under their own badge and then having it fulfilled by the Boxmaker. And when Richard talks about what they've done and how they've driven their success, because they're a pretty large company for an indie who started from nothing 40 years ago, they always invested in technology. So they have their own development team. They write code, they create software, they integrate different systems that don't like to talk to each other, which is really important. And to me, that's part of a digital mindset, because if you just do everything the same way, you can't do that. And they take out a lot of complexity from running hundreds of orders per day. You don't need hundreds. A company that does 5 orders per day is very comfortable in conventional manufacturing. So this is just to give you a little bit about who they are.
We have thousands of orders a month that fit this format, 29 by 41 in flutes that can run on the Highcon. And we have difficulty getting them out. We have a huge bottleneck at getting these orders specifically out of the building in a good timeline. And there's plenty of business to grow into. So once we realized that we could print all we wanted, it's extremely efficiently, but if we never get it out of the building, who cares, right? And that was really what we kept running into. We have plenty of print capacity.
So just listen, this is the problem statement. We have difficulty in getting these thousands of orders per month out. We have a huge bottleneck, getting these orders specifically out of the building in a good timeline, on time, in line with their SLA. They had thought, until they stopped and analyzed why they weren't managing, that print was their bottleneck, but it isn't. We've got plenty of print capacity. Remember the goal. The goal is maximizing throughput. They've discovered that their bottleneck is somewhere else. Let's listen to Richard again.
And we have a highly automated workflow. So laser cutting represented both an opportunity and a challenge to the workflow. And we did also consider additional conventional equipment, but that's just more of the same. It wouldn't have done anything different for us.
So as they were looking for solutions to the bottleneck, they understood that if they should put more of the same, it wasn't going to change enough. They needed to look at doing something different.
Most of our business systems in corrugated are very effective if you're running 10 orders a day at a machine center or per shift, and they're fairly large average order size. The time to create a spec and get an order produced in the system is not bad in most of our traditional systems. But when an order is for one piece and you probably won't get a repeat, at least of that exact same art, you can't commit that kind of time to creating the order.
So this is essentially the definition of the limitations of the conventional approach. Our business systems are really effective. You're running 10 orders per day at a machine center or per shift. That's conventional manufacturing, and it works for conventional jobs. But for their unconventional jobs, their digital jobs, their e-commerce jobs, their short-run jobs, they had a problem.
Certainly in our business, we find that it's best just to gang for the maximum yield on the sheet, regardless of which structures are on there, and then choose not to save that dart. We're primarily focused on contribution per hour and the bottom line result.
So this is how Richard, in this talk, referred to what I talked about as dynamic gang. We find that it's best to gang for the maximum yield on the sheet. In other words, put different jobs together on one sheet, on one layout, which is the antithesis of conventional. And then just choose not to save that dart. Dart is Highcon's digitally driven mechanical creasing foil, which has got these rules that have been created by our system. But see, the ganging for the maximum yield is talking about productivity, is talking about throughput. And they had started assuming they were going to keep these dart foils and reuse them, but that meant that they weren't able to gang in the same way because they had no idea whether the pieces would come together. So what did they say? We find it's less efficient for us to do that. We don't want to save them much like we would analog dies. Instead, we treat that as a consumable. And that's a real change. That's freeing themselves from the fact that a die is an asset mindset. And to me, this quote, but it was actually two different sentences that came from different parts of the talk, which is why you haven't heard him saying it, but he did, is saying we went through a change in mindset. That's the difference of having conventional manufacturing approach and a digital manufacturing approach.
Well, certainly just adding the throughput has enabled us to improve turnaround times. Our web to print business was oversold in the fourth quarter of last year. It became very difficult to keep up with demand, and lead times were stretched. So putting in the Highcon has helped eliminate the backlog. Lead time is closer to the norm of 10 days. We've turned back on rush production.
So the outcome was a solution to their problems. They had a wonderful problem to have. They had a booming business. They were getting too many orders. They were oversold and they couldn't keep up with demand. They actually used to have a feature called rush production, where you could get stuff faster than the norm of 10 days. They couldn't fulfill that, so they turned off the option, which is turning down revenue. People are prepared to pay a premium for it. And with Highcon, they were able to eliminate the backlog, get back to their 10 days SLA, and turn on rush production again. And to me, this says, in simple terms, digital manufacturing works. Now, I want to give you guys one more piece of information. They were doing digital manufacturing before Highcon using cutting tables like Kongsberg, or CAD tables as they call them in the United States. They're fine if someone's ordered 50 or 100. When they're trying to do 500, 1,000 or whatever on those machines where they can then have different layouts and whatever, which is great, they can digitally print them and so on, then it turns into hours of production. It doesn't work. They had this gap between where a conventional die cutter is comfortable, which is many more than the maximum at which a CAD table is comfortable. And Highcon slotted in there and solved their problem. So from their perspective, they streamlined hundreds of orders per month, reducing friction, improving customer service. So this was in July. He said they were pleased, so pleased that more equipment's gone in and more hopefully will be going in. 4 to 5 months in, they said Highcon is definitely a game changer. They're running larger order sizes than we anticipated. So they're, if you like it, their crossover point between conventional and Highcon moved right on those crossover charts. And they said, by the way, sustainability benefits. Sustainability is a whole different webinar. I'd love to do that one day, Marcus, but in the meantime, that's what I'm going to say about sustainability here, but they see benefits in terms of materials, in terms of waste minimization, and so on. And they said, look, we need to keep investing in our digital production workflow. There's a lot of automation, but we still have some human interactions. They need to go to full AI-driven dynamic ganging, for example. At thousands of orders per month, he said, if you're spending just 5 minutes per file, it adds up to an awful lot of time. And you say, yes, 1,000 orders, 5 minutes, an order is 5,000 minutes. That's a lot of time, and they do more than 1,000 orders per month. So they need to keep driving automation. One of the questions I asked him, and this is the last quotation from Richard, is what have you learned that you wish you'd known before you started? And his answer warms my heart.
Had we known how well it would all come together and how quickly, I think we would have made this decision at least a year ago. So I think the main learning is I wish I had made that decision earlier.
So for a company that already had a digital manufacturing mindset, but didn't have the right digital assets, his main learning is, why the heck didn't we do this sooner? Because it works so well, it's solving our problems. To me, the box maker is a living proof of the right approach for the right jobs. They personify having 2 different approaches and deciding for each job how to make it work. They have classic orders of corrugated boxes that run on flexo, that run on conventional analog die cutting, that are classic longer run jobs. And they don't want to change that. He talked about his business systems. And what's true for them is true for anybody else with a mix of jobs. Now, you may say, hey, I don't have that mix yet. But go back to those trends in the market. Are you seeing shorter runs? Are you seeing faster turnarounds? Are you seeing more changes so there are less repeats? Are you seeing all kinds of things like that? Because if the answer to those questions is yes, 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 then folks, sooner or later, you're going to be meeting the same problems that Richard had, which was, hey, we can print all we want, but we can't get the things out the door. For that, you need digital finishing. To make the most of digital finishing or digital die cutting, you need a digital manufacturing approach. So as we're coming to the end here, a digital manufacturing approach means being throughput-centric rather than job-centric, mixing jobs on the layout, on the sheet, on the die, and so on. It's doing that with ever larger numbers of shorter run jobs with shorter delivery times. You're optimizing for the finishing bottleneck and taking advantage of flexibility in printing, especially when there's digital printing. And you're freeing from traditional approaches to cost structures, fixed costs, and more. What did we say the key elements are? Dynamic ganging based on AI-driven workflow that's working not on the unit of a job, but thinking of a shift or a day of production in order to optimize. Digital die cutting and any printing, but honestly, digital printing is maturing. It doesn't replace conventional printing, but it belongs alongside it. And a full digital manufacturing operation will probably be fully digital. But the truth is, and I say this as somebody who was very involved in this in the past, a modern offset press with has short make ready, very low waste, CTP works beautifully, offset plates are cheap. Actually, folding carton, guys, you can do digital manufacturing using a conventional analog press as long as you do the dynamic ganging, you don't reuse your plates, and you do the digital die cutting. So if I go back to where I started, which was digital transformations, what I'm telling you is that digital manufacturing is a digital transformation. It's a way to say it's not just about a particular box like a Highcon digital die cutter, but it's an end-to-end production process that leads to a throughput revolution for people who are getting more and more of those newer kinds of jobs. It answers the question of how will digital change the technology, operating, or business model of the company? Because if it doesn't change anything, then it's probably going to be a red herring investment. And in 2022, it's likely at best to be table stakes, at worst to just do nothing. You need to think about competitive advantage. You need to think about how to do more. So it's not about the digital asset, it's about the operating model. That's the way to think about digital transformation and move beyond the box. That is the story that I wanted to share with you. It's a story that is, I believe, part of the imperative of the current era, that is responding to market trends, that is leveraging changes in technology, including AI-driven software, that's helping make complex decisions automatic rather than requiring complex impossible manual processes, and taking advantage of our digital die cutting solution. That's it. Marcus, maybe we move from here to any questions that might have come in or any questions that you have. I'm also cognizant that we're almost at quarter to the hour, so we're probably also running out of time.
Yeah, but thanks so much, Simon. Excellent presentation, talk. Really appreciate that. I learned some stuff there, not least your enthusiasm and optimism and inspiration for the future. So I have a couple of questions that sprung into my mind, although I think you articulated them really well. The box maker as a business, obviously are what one would call perhaps an innovator. What, in specific terms or mindset, what attributes and mindset perhaps did they display towards what was and is a new technology for them? Often these things are about unlearning how we used to do things and learning new things. What kind of mindset would you describe is useful when adopting this kind of technology?
So to me, the most important thing when adopting this kind of technology, and it was equally true for adopting digital printing, is to take a step back and say, this isn't a better mousetrap. This is an opportunity to rethink what and how and why we do things. Not because the what, the why, and the how we do things is bad, but because you don't just want to do the same. Hey, the famous comment that if Henry Ford had gone out and asked people what they wanted a faster horse. Steve Jobs with the iPhone didn't say, do you want a better phone? When he announced the iPhone, he announced 3 new products: a mobile music player, a mobile internet browser, and a mobile phone. Then he said, but they're not 3 products, they're 1. He was rethinking the device. None of us understood that. And when he saw the first iPhone and the App Store opened, it was like, oh, isn't it obvious that's what we need? But it wasn't obvious. So I'm asking people to step out of their comfort zone, not assume anything is obvious, and instead look at what they have, how they work, what their challenges are, and how they can actually solve problems.
Yeah. I think that solving problems, focusing on that, because often the word digital is used almost as a sort of attribute to a business. Oh yes, we have digital technology, but how do you use it and what value does it add? What you're saying there.
That's a digital transformation piece. That's why I chose to start there. It's not my research, it's not my thought leadership, but to me, it's a reminder that if you just think narrow, your benefits at best will be narrow. But probably the reality is for most businesses, if they think broad, they'll find opportunity they hadn't even understood was there.
And from what I understand, these bottlenecks that you use the word, and when we ran the event in Cambridge a few weeks ago, people use that term a lot. That's become even more acute now. Is that right, that problem?
I believe so. I believe that is the inherent meaning of more orders of shorter runs. Because the total number of packages isn't going down, it's going up. but there are more and more orders. In other words, if once upon a time growth meant that my batch size would grow, contemporary trends are that batch sizes are shrinking. And if the total number of packages is growing, that means that there's more jobs with shorter runs, and more jobs with shorter runs shifts the paradigm.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you mentioned, which interested me, was that one could imagine with the increase of online retail that perhaps that dynamic's changing design of boxes and how boxes are created and so on. But you hinted at something that I kind of picked up on, really, was the unboxing experience. That is, if so, tell us a little about that.
Okay, so I think that one of the things about the unboxing experience is that it's added some more demands on the box, from the trivial, which is right sizing, so we don't have all this extra air or fillers or whatever. And actually, Highcon can do a great job on cardboard fillers as well. But also on the way the box opens. And there is a challenge around security, but ease of opening. We have all struggled to open a box of breakfast cereal because the so-called zipper on the top just doesn't work. And one of the beauties of laser die cutting is that you can create the most elegantly effective, easy to open, but secure mechanisms, zippers, whatever, that are just terrific. And right now, we are actually, for example, preparing our Christmas mailing to customers and prospects that is going to be produced tomorrow. It's a bit late, I know, but better late than never. And we've simulated, we're doing that with an opening mechanism. It looks like a package. You open it and it reminds you how easy it is and how different it is. And to me, that's a critical part of the opening experience. You want to ship it in a safe box. No one can tamper with it, but you don't want to make it Fort Knox to be opened. We can help.
Brilliant, brilliant. And perhaps final question is, if somebody's at the beginning of their digital journey, or perhaps they have been thinking about it for a while, but actually haven't really known where to start, any advice you would give somebody in that position?
We'll be glad to help them. What can I say? But it starts by, actually, before you can have an intelligent conversation with a vendor or a partner or whatever, start by analyzing what's happening in your business and doing some projections on how you expect that to change. Because is it changing slowly or is it changing quickly? If you say, hey, today I have X jobs that sound like they would fit this kind of approach per week, how many did I have 12 months ago, 24 months ago, 36 months ago? If it's growing by 5% a year, then you don't have an acute problem under all probability. If it's growing at 25, 30, 50% a year, even though the problem may not be acute today, you need to ask yourself, if it continues growing like that, what's it going to be tomorrow? How am I going to cope with it? So that to me is kind of the zero order questions before you can have a good conversation, because you need to know, do I have a problem? What's the magnitude of that problem? Or when do I expect it to become a problem?
Yeah, that's good advice. I think sort of analysing where your profit's being made and the 80-20 rule in a way, isn't it? Sort of kind of going, where is this and what trends are at play and what kind of technology would help me? And I think that's great advice. Is there anything else you want to finish on before we kind of wrap up?
I want to wish everybody a wonderful holiday season, a year with less COVID next year, and it's not going to disappear, but it should be less. And a year in which people actually drive digital transformations in their business, because in my opinion, people who try and avoid it are likely to wake up one day and find the world has moved on without them.
Yeah. Well, that's an optimistic, positive, but strong message. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon. Excellent presentation. Lots of people are telling me that excellent presentation. So that doesn't necessarily always happen. So well done. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Marcus. Thanks for giving us the platform.